Well, Dallas and the crew did promise that as soon as they get episodes finished, they would drop them. So last night, we got the premiere of episode 2, and if you stuck around, we got the surprise premiere of episode 3, which was a very different and unique episode, and it was very good. Did you stick around and check it out? What did you think? Let's talk about it. Welcome to Durbania. I'm Durbin, and this is my spoiler talk review for The Chosen Season 2, Episode 3, entitled Matthew 4:24. So, since it's called Matthew 4:24, let's check out Matthew 4:24. News about him spread all over Syria, and people brought to him all who were ill with various diseases, those suffering severe pain, the demon-possessed, those having seizures, and the paralyzed, and he healed them. And this episode did such a great job with that. I mean, it opens and you see this huge crowd of people who need to be healed. And Jesus is like in this little tent or structure, so we don't even see him. Just people are going in and they're coming out healed. And so you just see this massive, massive line. Now, one thing this episode did that was very cool and very unique, like the first 15 minutes, I think Dallas said it was like 15 pages of the script or something. It's just the first huge, long chunk of this episode was one single shot, and it was glorious. The amount of work, the memorization of lines, every place that the cameraman, that the actors, every place you need to be, it's so delicate, and this scene was long. At one point, I looked at Laura and I said, how long has this been going on? Because this has been one single shot, right? And Laura's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I think it has been one single shot. Of course, Dallas confirms that after the episode is over and how difficult that was, but how God set it up just right. So some things were kind of frustrating as they're trying to get it all together, but it seems everything was taken to the limit, to that right time of the day, where just as the sun was setting, the shadows weren't harsh, the lighting was right, and as the scene progresses, you notice like it's getting darker as the sun sinks more below the horizon. It's just like the lighting and everything, like it was perfect and it worked. So it's a very interesting and awesome, unique way to have this episode open and do that whole unique shot. Now, the other unique thing about this episode is really it's all about the disciples sitting around the fire and talking. But it's so interesting because this episode just kind of takes you and puts you by the fire with them. And sitting right there at the fire with them, you could just feel how exhausted they are. Like, it's a good thing that they've been a part of today, but they've been taking shifts, helping Jesus, taking care of this huge, never-ending crowd, and they are just tired. And yet, as they sit around the fire, tired, their conversations are so incredibly interesting. So as they're talking about these things, it's this unique perspective. I mean, we read the Bible, we hear about the disciples, and we see that they have questions and they look at things, wrong in some areas, and Jesus has to correct them. But I think sometimes we forget the humanity of it all. And so us being with them by this fire as they're having these conversations reminds us they're people and they're trying to figure this out. I mean, they're having interesting conversations like Jesus is the Messiah. So what does that even mean? And so we get into their ideas of the Messiah and what they believe about the Messiah.
Why is it you expect a warrior?
Zechariah, then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations.
He'll come as a warrior. He will deliver Jerusalem. And so they have this picture of him as a warrior. I like Mary Magdalene's perspective because she's saying, look, I came into this not knowing much, so this might be easier for me because I don't have any expectations. And so what you really see is with this huge crowd of people, all day long, the disciples have been taking turns and in shifts helping Jesus and managing this crowd. Now that is an exhausting task. So you have that in this episode. They're tired, they're a little grumpy, they're on edge because they have spent all day. And this is good, and they're loving it. They're loving seeing what Jesus is doing. At the same time, it's not quite what they expected because they're really getting into this conversation about how they expected a military leader. Oh, well, that could probably still happen, and I don't have any military experience. And so it's very interesting getting into their ideas of the Messiah because, like I said, that Zechariah verse shows him coming as this conquering king. But see, we have this unique perspective because we're living after all of this. So we can look back and go, But you guys, Isaiah 53, the suffering servant who dies, by his stripes we are healed. He's wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. But it's easier for us to say that, right? Because hindsight is 2020. So we understand now Jesus came as the suffering servant and died for our sins and rose from the dead. And there will be the second coming where he comes in all of his glory, in all of his splendor, and reigns on this earth for 1,000 years. But it's like getting into their mindset. It's like, I get that.
Here is what I also do not understand. Isn't the Messiah supposed to come at a time when all is holy?
I think he's here because we can't be holy without him.
Wait, is there anything I'm misunderstanding? Is there anything that I'm holding on to that maybe I need to really get into the Bible and see what it actually says versus how I hold on to that? And so it's very interesting as you get into these conversations and they're talking about the Messiah and what does that really mean? Another interesting conversation is little James apparently has a form of paralysis, and it's something that he's kind of dealt with all of his life. And so Thomas is asking him about that.
Why hasn't he healed you? How do you watch all these healings today? Does it bother you?
I mean, isn't that a question that we ask today and something that we deal with today? Why am I not healed? Why hasn't he healed this person? And those are very real questions. And there's something about seeing the disciples ask those very real questions that really, I'm going to use the word real again, makes all of this feel so much more real. It just really draws us in like, that's right. I bet you they would be asking questions like that. And little James does drop the point, goes, well, actually, I haven't even asked him yet.
Why not?
I'm just afraid that if I mention it to him, it will make him change his mind about me or something.
And Thomas is like, well, I'm sure he knows about it. He's not going to be surprised if you tell him you're dealing with this. Because if I had your malady and I was seeing all of these crowds get healed, I would demand that I get healed. And it's like, wow. Because look, I've seen miracles in my life. My sister, about 12, 13 years ago, was just driving home from a late shift at Starbucks. Two street racers decided to race, and they were racing on the opposite side of the freeway. One dude hit his nitro, lost control, went over the grassy median to my sister's side of the freeway, and hit her head on. She's supposed to be dead. The impact alone should have killed her. But to my understanding now, doctors are Christians because there was no other explanation to the fact that not only did she live, but her healing was completely miraculous. Now, I say that, but now here we are 12, 13 years later, and her brain injury was traumatic. So today, she still has one side of her body that is slower than the other. So there's still effects that we deal with. And so I have that question myself where I go, okay, this miraculous thing happened, this miraculous thing happened, she was healed here, healed there. So why? Like, why 13 years later is one half of her body still slower than the other? And it's not like I ask and doubt and go, why, God, won't you do that? But it's one of those things that I do wonder. And it makes me think of this verse in Deuteronomy that says, the secret things belong to the Lord, but the revealed things belong to us and our children so that we may live. And so I have to stand on what I know and what's revealed. So I'll keep standing on Isaiah 53. By his wounds we are healed. 1 Peter 2:24. By his wounds we were healed. Romans 8:11. The same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead lives in us and quickens our mortal body with that life. It's what I know. So I will stand on that word, and I do my best not to try to make up theology for the stuff I don't understand. I say I do my best, but sometimes I'm guilty of it. I'm human. The point is, it's very interesting because I deal with those types of questions, and it's interesting to see the disciples dealing with those type of questions in this show, in this very scene. I mean, you even got big questions where Thomas is talking about how I would love to ask him, why did God allow this Roman occupation? And why has he allowed it to go so long? And it's interesting because it's not like the episode wants to give us theology and dive into all of these answers. It's doing a very good job of raising those real questions that we as humans do ask.
How did you know? When did you know who he was?
It's very cool when the mother of Jesus, Mary, shows up and she comes to sit with them at the fire and prepares dinner, because Mary Magdalene is asking her, so when did you realize this is the Son of God? Like, what was it like giving birth to him? And Mary's like, well, we're all tired. I'm sure nobody wants to be bored with all of these details, and all the disciples immediately go, yeah.
Yes.
And me, they couldn't see it, but here I am on my chair in my living room going, yes, I want to hear this. I want to hear this from your perspective. She goes, well, I won't go into all the details. And I just went, please do. But what she did get into was incredibly interesting, because really what she talked about was her motherhood. So Jesus is born, and you know the story, they're in a cave, they're in a stable. And as Jesus is born, they had to clean him up like you would any other baby. He was cold, he was crying, and he needed her.
He needed my help. My help. A teenager from Nazareth.
And she even had this brief thought of, is this really the Son of God? I mean, she knew who he was, and she says that, I knew who he was, but it's just that brief thought that went through her mind. And here he is as this child, and he needs her. And then as he got older, he needed her less and less. And then when Joseph passed away, you know, she said he grew up fast. And so
He hasn't needed me for a long time, I suppose. As a mom, it makes me a little sad sometimes.
And so she's happy to be here with these group of disciples because she can find some things to do, places where she's needed, and she can really help. So it was very cool to get into her mind and her thought process. So it did a very good job with these conversations, just drawing us into the humanity of everything that's going on. There was a very interesting section of conversation when they're all talking about how they're proud to be Jewish, the ups and the downs, the hardships of the occupation. And not just the occupation, but sometimes the hardships of just the Jewish law, of all the rules they need to follow. How some of them people are like, yeah, it can be a little tiring. How others are like, yeah, but I love the rules. I love the history. I love having that structure. And so it was a very cool conversation going around, but it led to this incredibly emotional confrontation where Simon really confronts Matthew.
What do you want me to say? I don't know what you want from me.
An apology. You did choose to work for them, and you made my life even harder than it already was.
And he's like, so what about you, tax man? I mean, you lived with Rome. You escaped persecution. You worked for them. You know, the whole idea being that through all of their hardships and all that they go through, they're a community and they're going through it together.
If we hold tight just a little more, we'll have rescue because we're chosen, all of us. And you betrayed that, and you spit on it.
Because Matthew, he really did become a tax collector. Now, in episode 2, I gotta say this. I was extremely proud of Matthew for standing up to himself, for standing up for himself. How he said to Simon, we don't judge each other on our past anymore. We do things different because of him. And he's 100% right. And there's a part here where Simon is wrong because Simon said, even if you apologized right now, I couldn't accept it because I can't forgive what you've done. Talking about the fact that they are a community and they're going through this together. Well, except Jewish tax collectors who betray them by joining Rome. And by joining Rome and being tax collectors, make burdens heavy, take more than they should, turn people over to Rome to be beaten, to be imprisoned, in some cases probably death. It was a brutal time. It was a brutal society. And Matthew chose the side of the tax collector. And even Andrew gets into this and says, well, Simon is very rude, but at the same time, he's not wrong. I mean, you could at least apologize. You made my life so much harder than it needed to be, and it was already hard enough. Thomas, who didn't even have Matthew as his tax collector, because Thomas is in a totally different district, is saying, yeah, why do you guys do that? My business was good, but I was always struggling to try to keep up with all the demands. And Matthew is just kind of like flabbergasted, because I don't think he's proud of what he did, but Jesus has forgiven him completely. But we see Simon struggling with that, John standing up. Who are you to not forgive his sins, you know?
What keeps putting you in authority? Who are you to forgive or not to forgive?
What, you're on his side?
No, of course not, but you've had your problems too.
But again, there's very real human emotions where even though John and James were kind of defending Matthew, they also understood Simon. Because they were in Matthew's tax district. They understood the heavy burdens that were constantly laid on them. And so it adds this incredibly interesting conversation like, wow, okay, Matthew, maybe you should, you need to apologize. You do. You need to apologize. Maybe make some form of restitution. Like, it really brings up this whole thing, and it's like Jesus has forgiven him, and you see the people, though, struggling with the things that Matthew has done, and it kind of just, I don't know, it brings it home, and you're like, wow. So this is what the conversations with the disciples could have been like. But at the height of their anger, before Matthew can really get a word in, everybody, like, they're on edge. Their anger's at its height. And then the line is finished. There's no more people to be healed, and Jesus comes around the corner.
Good night.
Man, he looked awful. And by that I mean, you could tell how exhausted he was. He was sweaty. He was tired. He looked ill. I mean, he wasn't ill. You're at that point of complete and utter exhaustion. And to see him round that corner and just go up to the fire and be like, good night, and just quickly heading to his tent, and he's like groaning because his feet hurt, his back hurts. I mean, I don't know what hurts, but you could just tell that he's sore, he's in pain, he's exhausted. And then Mary sees it.
Oh, Ima. What would I do without you, Ima?
And it silences the fight that they're having as they are reminded of who Jesus really is and just kind of the burden that he carries. And it's like, I don't know. Like, I don't even know if the words I just used to describe that are even right. Here they are fighting over all of this stuff, and then here comes Jesus around the corner, and it's like, oh man, look at what this man carries. I mean, did I ever think about that in reading the Bible, where it says things like it was a line all day long of him healing person after person? I know he's the Son of God, but he's also human. He was completely human. How tired did he get? What did it look like with him carrying those burdens? And you just, it's a moment that just silences not just the cast, but us that are watching. It's powerful how they portrayed that. So what's going to happen between Simon and Matthew? Simon, I believe, I mean, come on, I read the Bible. I'm reading through the book of Acts right now. Simon ends up forgiving Matthew. I'm going to be very curious to see how they portray that, how they portray this character growth between Simon and Matthew. What is Matthew going to do about this now that he's really heard their side of the story? So there's so much that I'm looking forward to as this show continues. It was a powerful episode. I mean, what did you think? What topics of conversation did they talk about around the fire that really stood out to you? I want to hear from you. Let's talk about that in the comments. While you're there, hit that subscribe button to become a Durbanian, and hit that bell by the subscribe button so you're notified for the next time I drop a movie review, a Chosen review, a theological analysis, or anything else I do here. I'm Durbin. Thanks for checking out Durbania.